Hey everybody, this is Tim Chavez from Faith Matters. We've been really excited to share the interview you're about to hear with you. Our guest was Astrid Tuminez, president of Utah Valley University. Astrid is an absolute delight to talk with and listen to. She's full of stories, humor, and deep insights that made our time with her pass way too quickly. This interview actually came about because Astrid wrote an essay in Melissa Inouye and Kate Holbrook's new book, Every Needful Thing. We loved Astrid's essay, and we knew we wanted to get to know her better. Astrid has an absolutely fascinating and unique story. She grew up in the slums of the Philippines, but along with her siblings, was discovered to have an exceedingly bright intellect and was offered a free place at one of the most prestigious and expensive Catholic schools in the area. As a child, she was religiously a Catholic, but felt that she was always brimming with questions that were being hushed. When she eventually met the Latter-day Saint missionaries, it was a different experience. They gave her a new framework to think about the world, and they weren't afraid to at least try to answer her questions. Astrid's pursuit of education eventually took her to the United States, where she graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's degree in international relations and Russian literature from Brigham Young University. She later earned a master's degree from Harvard University in Soviet Studies, and a PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Political Science. Before becoming president of UVU, Astrid spent many years in leadership in the corporate, nonprofit, and academic worlds. What we maybe loved most about Astrid was that her unique perspectives make the world of faith and intellect seem expansive, exciting, and adventurous, even full of mystery. She's found spiritual insight and even practice well outside of Mormonism, while simultaneously keeping that fixed foot in the restored gospel. In a real way, she's living Joseph Smith's injunction to receive truth, let it come from whence it may. We want to send Astrid a huge thanks for coming on the show, and we really think you're going to love this one. And with that, we'll jump right in.
Astrid, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We're really excited to have you. Finally, we wanted to talk to you for a long time, and so we're excited to have this book to be our excuse to get you into the studio. So,
well, thank you for being patient.
Yeah. You have the most interesting origin story, and I would just love for you to talk about that, where you grew up and how you found yourself here in Orem, Utah.
Great question. So I was born in a little farming village called Pali. You can't find it on any map. It's on Panay Island in the south central part of the Philippines, about an hour south of Manila if you flew on a plane. And my parents were basically came from peasant families. And so I was born in that village, and when I was 2 years old, my mother decided that her children needed more education. And so she hauled all of us into the city. My father didn't have a job. I think we rented one room where there were at that point 6 children and put us all in that one room. And then she helped a local politician who was also my step-grandfather win a local election. And after that victory, we got the permit to build a hut in the water on the beach in the city. And my mother's island was it's a massive island. It's just across the bay there. And so she got her relatives to, lash together bamboo and just bring it across the sea. And we built a hut. And so in 1966, we moved into that hut. And when I was 5 years old, Catholic nuns from the Daughters of Charity were doing service in the slums, and they found my family, and they talked to my older sisters and to me and my mother, and they just found us really bright and promising. So the nun who found us, Sister Elvira Correa, I'm still in touch with her. She was a very young nun in her 20s at that time, and they saw something in us, and they were starting this experiment of a free school. They ran the second most expensive school in the city for girls, very exclusive school. So the what they call the free department was for those who couldn't pay. And so they were going to see if any of us could make it. And so I got an education from Colegio del Sagrado Corazón de Jesus. Many of the great schools in the Philippines come from the Spanish period. So that's my origin story. And when I was 10 years old, Mormon missionaries were doing tracting in the slums. It's quite filthy because the sea was our only sewage system. Wow. And one of them fell in the water. And I was so discouraged, they never returned. But then they left our number and names in the drawer. And then another set of missionaries 6 months later came back. And then my 2 oldest siblings joined the church. But that's how I eventually came to Brigham Young University
Wow.
because of that connection.
And did you feel even as a child that you had some sort of spiritual conversion to the church, or was it sort of like my sisters did this, or?
No, I was definitely against it because I drank beer practically every day as a 10-year-old.
Oh, wow.
And I was so
Wow.
upset because my older sisters were my companions for going to Mass. I never missed Catholic Mass. I never missed confession every week. So I was quite religious as a child simply because the nuns had instilled that in me, a religiosity and fear of God at an early age. So anyway, so I was really very, very loyal to the Catholic Church. And so I didn't want to join my sister's religion. But they're, all these missionaries, they never give up. They keep talking to you. And then eventually there was this missionary that I liked so much. He was from Utah. His name was Larry Scott Jenkins. And he was just so nice. And so I wanted to listen to him. And also at that point in time, I was asking the nuns a lot of questions, and they were trying to hush me up, like don't ask all those questions. Our high priest and the Pope, they're still studying that stuff. And then all these missionaries, they had all these answers for me, about life and where I came from and why am I here. And if I weren't a human being, why couldn't I have come here as a pebble? The missionaries were really great at giving me,
Wow.
a schematic, if you will, for life. So then I joined the church, and I was baptized on a stormy day on a beach in the Philippines.
Wow.
Do you feel like you had? So did you have another religion in your childhood growing up before you entered this Catholic school? Like, was there something?
Catholicism, but Catholicism.
Your family was Catholic.
Yeah, Catholicism mixed with all of the folk beliefs of the villages that my parents are from. Because even though we lived in the city, I was 2 when we moved to the city. All of our summers were spent in these fishing and farming villages, and everything there. People have beliefs on everything, and a lot of it's folk belief that had to do with spirits in the forest. My uncle married to my father's sister. This is a very famous story of how he died. He shot a monkey, and the next day he was having breakfast, and he had a little bit of money. And this boar just comes in through the back door, jumps at the table, stares him in the face because he had hurt these animals. And that evening, his intestines just start getting bundled up. They rush him to the city and opened him up. And the doctor said, we can't explain this. So the whole village believes that was the bad spirit. And you have to be very careful what you touched in the woods when you're collecting firewood. Or my sister was up this tree once eating these little berries, and a cold hand, like an ice cold hand, held her. And so we believed all that.
Wow.
My best friend in elementary school, her father was a philanderer, and her mother died, but everybody believed that her mother was actually living in the woods with the spirits, and she was sending messages and notes to the family. So we just believed all of that.
Yeah.
We believed in big hairy men that are throwing rocks down the mountains, and even in the slums, we had all of that as well. Somebody we thought was a witch, we thought was trying to kill one of the neighbor boys it's huts just clustered in here in the sea, and when the tide is low, you're on the beach. And so my brother kept vigil on the beach because we were so afraid this kid would die. And they're in the beach, and they're burning rubber tires, and they hear horses' hooves, and there's no horses. So that was happening to us all the time.
Wow.
And so I had that, and Catholicism and Mormonism.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
Do you feel
fascinating.
like in some ways that magical worldview sort of primed you for the restoration? I mean, did it make you more open to this idea that a heavenly being appeared to a 14-year-old?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's nothing weird about that.
Yeah.
For us,
Yeah.
there's
It's the
nothing
fourth
weird
spirit.
about that. We didn't question these things. We didn't
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
were you drunk? Were you hallucinating? We just took it as fact.
Yeah.
The existence of something
Yes.
other than what we normally see, feel,
Yeah.
touch was normal.
I was just going to ask, I'm so curious about this because I feel like that's not so normal anymore. Like it's not part of our culture to be so undiscriminating about stories like this, right? We really resist this idea of magic and the supernatural, and so I just am curious how that is affecting your faith now. Do you feel like that has made you more open to having experiences with something that you can't explain logically, like God?
Yeah, so I've never had a problem with that. I've always thought that faith, God, these things happen. And so it just depends on whether or not you're thinking I'm going to listen or I'm open to that. What did happen when I joined the LDS church was I started thinking of all of this as bad. Your culture. Yeah, like all of these spirit things.
So maybe that it's real, but it's coming from the
that it's bad.
Yeah. Are there pieces that you've kept that you feel like we're really tapping into something beautiful that helped connect you to God?
Yeah, so I've come around again, to I think faith is a progression, and we go back to the things we knew and we redefine them. And since 2005, I've also been a very, I think I would call myself a pretty serious student of Buddhism. And so that's another element that's come into my faith, because there's so many aspects of that are to me so compelling. So the focus on suffering as central to the human condition. And if you could really think about that, you'd have a lot more compassion for others. And compassion is the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing for all of us.
Yeah.
And also in Buddhism, they're not worried about sin. They're worried about our connectedness as people. So that's helped me reinterpret my own scriptures. Like, I believe if ye are not one, ye are not mine. That's literally a very Buddhist concept. Wow. That if you do not understand how you're linked to the tree outside that happens to be producing oxygen so you can breathe, and if you're not linked to your mother, your spiritual, physical ancestors, that suffering in one place is suffering in another place. So it's really, really profound. And so it's been a long time now, meditation, and then thinking also about present moment. That's another very powerful, and it's so trendy now, but it wasn't trendy. Right. It wasn't trendy 18 years ago so much, but I felt so compelled by that. And then some of these skills that I'm really bad at, like stopping, centering, calming, being present. I'm just not good at that. My brain is frenetic. And then in my younger days, I was just thinking from the religious perspective, it's all about like work, so you can be saved and be perfect. That's just it was so exhausting. Yeah. And so I just loved Buddhism because it introduced me. It made this concept of the love of God even more real. Wow. That if I were walking like if I were walking down the street and I contemplated the life of a leaf, and how I'm connected to that leaf, or I used to do this. I used to chew my food 33 times before swallowing, because you're supposed to think about the soil, the sun, the cloud. So there's the food elements of what you're eating, but the non-food elements, the farmer who harvested it, the truck driver who drove it to Harmon's, it changes the way you experience life. And my life is so busy that it is always a struggle to actually have. It's a very spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I'm a very odd person in the sense that I can read the Book of Mormon and be totally moved by it and think, okay, there's really, really stuff in here that I feel like this is God talking to me, and I could also read the Bhagavad Gita and be moved by it. Or I have a guru, Thich Nhat Hanh. He passed away in 2021. He's very famous. You may have heard of him. And I got into his writings pretty early. And I just thought sometimes, man, he's so repetitive. But then if you read it, slowly, it's unbelievably beautiful and profound. All these teachings that he's put forward about. And it's really a way to deal with life, to live life fully. You're not waiting for the next life. You are in the here and now, and your presence is love. Your presence is understanding. Your presence is is revelation. Things get revealed to you,
Mhm.
you know, when you are present. Meditation, I've found, I think that it saved my life, literally.
Really?
Because I'm just like a nervous wreck of a person. Sometimes it may not always look that way, but yeah. So one of the things that I discovered is because my religion was about punishment, not about love. You know, both Catholicism and Mormonism had so many elements that were punitive,
Yeah.
and not about love. And actually, meditating gave me a conduit to what I would still call the Holy Ghost, but completely different and more profound, I guess, than I'd ever experienced it.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really beautiful. I
Yeah.
wonder, given that's your perspective, how you think about some of the exclusivist language that we sometimes use in the church. So one true church, or even the fullness of the gospel, or thinking of the straight and narrow path as sort of this one way that everyone should be on. Have you reinterpreted phrases like that? And how do you think about them?
Absolutely. You know, I felt very lonely in the 90s because Faith Matters didn't exist. And it was so lonely because I had all these questions. But Harvard was great because we had an institute there that was just filled with these incredibly lively, well-educated, smart students, and also instructors who were incredibly open and willing to engage in inquiry. And so how have I reinterpreted a lot of that? So when I think about, you know, fullness of the gospel, I think about myself as a young person starting as a Catholic. And I think about thus spake Zarathustra and the camel, the lion, and the child. And people may have some different interpretations of that. But I really thought, yeah, I started as a camel. I just inherited all the magical worldview of my relatives, and then Catholicism, and God's gonna, you know, the devils are gonna have pitchforks, like, you know, poking me in hell if I'm a bad person. And then came Mormonism. Oh, I see the light. I know everything now.
Yeah.
I know exactly where to go and how to get there. And I would engage all the born again Christians in the Philippines in this. Really, we would yell at each other. We were so angry at each other because I had the truth and they didn't, and they felt they had the truth.
Mhm.
So I feel that that's all like a camel kind of existence.
Yeah.
You're just taking all of these things and you've been saddled with it, and you hit your 20s, 30s, and then I think I would say even starting at BYU and then into my early 30s, maybe, you know, the lion phase where I had a lot of anger.
Yeah.
I was just like, I'm so angry at everything. As a young woman in the church, I remember my teacher made us write a letter to my future husband. I ripped it up because it's so naive, you know. That's not how marriage works. That's not how anything works. And then my gender awakening, if you will, that suddenly I was like an equal in other parts of society, but never could be.
Yeah.
In my own religion, which I loved, and so there was just a lot of anger, but you know, I kept it mainly quiet, and I always felt that I should keep going to church. I need to keep engaging my religion and my people, and also because I considered myself a product of this religion. Why would I throw it out? Because a lot of this good in me, you know, totally came from my faith. So then, you know, Nietzsche talks about the camel, the lion, and then the child. And yes, the child is an adventurer. The child says yes. And I love that. I love that maybe, you know, in my child phase, I'm saying yes to the Book of Mormon, and yes to the Bhagavad Gita, and yes to going to church, yes to teaching the kids in primary, and unless we have like political conversations and they're driving me crazy when they talk about, you know, who won the election. So then I think it's made my faith more solid in that sense, in that, you know, I think there's a lot of simplicity and there's also a lot of complexity. And much as we would like all the time to say we are 100% sure, I've said to people that's just absurd. I'm not even sure of who I am, you know, at my age. Or in Buddhism, where change is so emphasized that, you know, the person who started this interview with you, is a different person than I am right now. A lot of
Yeah.
things have already happened in my body so change and what I love about what we teach too is the glory of God is intelligence. And so I found so many redeeming aspects of my faith that can embrace and explore like a child with excitement.
Yeah.
And I
Wow.
think it actually made me more whole, in my 30s, 40s, more excited about religion and really engaging it.
Yeah.
Yeah, your story is making me ask the question too, like, to what extent do you believe that God sort of directs, or at least has a hand in the story, the arc of our lives? I have to imagine that, had the nuns not shown up, that your educational opportunities would have been very different, and
Absolutely.
that at the end of the day, some very different things would have happened that unfolded in your life.
Yeah.
And so, do you go back and connect those dots with some perspective of coincidence, or with a larger plan?
So I do believe in the hand of God, and maybe there are two things to say about that. So one of the hymns that I love is "I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord," and I just love that because I think there's wisdom above and beyond me. I'm kind of trapped in this body, and I'm kind of trapped in this brain. But whether you're thinking physics or spirituality, there is so much that we can't even fathom, or it's just that we're just trapped in these bodies. And trapped is a really good word. And so I feel that if I'm open to that kind of guidance, or the still small voice, or feelings that I trust, or even what looks coincidental, but it happens, and then suddenly I'm in a path that, wow, I never thought I'd be in this path before. So I do believe in that. I think quite strongly because of my experience. What is hard for me is when that is trivialized. When people say, God guided me to find just the right sweater in the store.
Yeah.
Or people will say, well, I lost my keys and God guided me. And okay, maybe those things happen too. The reason I don't like it is people in the deepest, darkest throes of despair, or someone's beating them up right now, or raping them right now, or killing them right now, and they ask God or why did they not get the guidance not to go to that place in the first place? So it is a mystery, and I really like the word mystery, because mystery then implies exploration, mystery implies richness, mystery implies learning. Einstein got puzzled by some things and mysteries, so he discovered gravity and relativity. So I think mystery is in line with the glory of God is intelligence, or in other words, light and truth. Because if you are willing to face the mystery and explore, you will definitely get insights. I think divine guidance can come to you.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I would love for you to talk to people who are also having this experience of recognizing wisdom traditions or religions outside of their own that are really resonating with them. Like this experience that you talked about with Buddhism. You're just finding good fruit that is genuinely serving your life. And I think you have that experience, and then you combine that with the uncertainty of your own religious conviction. And I think for a lot of people that becomes what feels like a fork in the road, and they feel like maybe this means I should leave this church. Maybe there's something better somewhere else. It just gets really foggy. And I guess really what I'm asking is, why do you stay? If you don't have the certainty, and if you're finding goodness elsewhere, like, why not just pick what's great and let go of the things that are hard, and be more like free flowing in your religious engagement?
So there's sort of a lot in that question. Again, I think about, so the first thing that I think about is, who am I and what am I becoming? And then I go back to my LDS faith, which is really, like I said earlier, a giant chunk of that. Mm-hmm. And then I look at all these other religions. And what I've loved about Buddhism is the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, they all say, don't leave your tradition, don't leave your faith. They actually say that.
Yeah.
They actually say, just engage it and see how you can enrich. They never try to convert you into something else. And then I think about the practice of our religion, which is, a lot of it is about serving. And I think that's pretty good. That's pretty profound. And, a strong community, strong families. And again, it might get, it might become cliched or fetishized. It's not about that. But there are basics to loving full life that's taught in our church. And I love this idea of practice. I think when I go to church every Sunday, I don't want to get up and go to church, but I'm practicing. Mm-hmm. I'm practicing getting up because I might learn something today, and then I teach the 10-year-olds. I'm practicing for them because, I love their questions and they love how funny our class is. And it's practicing with things that make me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because if I were just going to say, okay, I'll just pick this and, never have to do anything church related, yeah, I might get more of my Sundays free, but then I'm not really practicing in my discomfort.
Yeah.
And I think Latter-day Saints are striving people. I love that about us. We are a striving people. If we didn't get that right, we're striving to make it better all the time. And I think that's wonderful. And I love the idea of continuous revelation. I think that means continuous improvement. The way that church is in its history, there's a lot of craziness, but why does that surprise anyone? Why can't we be that child in Nietzsche, where we say yes and yes and yes.
Yeah.
And I do think there are people who are so depressed and have been hurt in maybe more serious ways. And for some of these people, it's healthier to distance themselves from the church. But, if they are, again, if you wrestle with it, I think there is so much good, but you really have to, it takes a lot of work. I think you can't just sit there and be passive and say, my bishop will give me all the answers or general conference will give me all the answers. There's a lot of beauty there. There's a lot of joy, and reserve to yourself the right to define what is your faith, what is your spiritual foundation.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. And my own Mormonism has brought me so many good fruits in my life. One of the things we talk about at Faith Matters too is how to sort of articulate a compelling vision for what the church has to bring the world. Like if you have the perspective that all religions and wisdom and faith traditions are sort of cultivating a different part of the garden. Like you mentioned Buddhism, and I don't want to just breeze over this because I know it's so much deeper, but like, if you think about maybe meditation and presence and non-attachment could be gifts that Buddhism takes forward to the world and has done. What are some of the gifts that we as Latter-day Saints could take forward to the world? Like what do we do especially well that we have to offer?
Yes, there are many things in our church I think that we do really well, So one of those things is community, that if you cannot be a good Latter-day Saint if you don't serve anyone. Mm-hmm. I think we do that really well. We do service well. And again, it's not always 100% great, but I think we understand community and we understand service. Yeah. I think we also understand endurance. That's why Latter-day Saints are like the best workers, they're committed to endurance and delivering and be true to your word and have integrity. I love our articles of faith. I think they're all pretty sublime. Mm-hmm. I think all of them, including speaking in tongues. In the 13th article of faith, we believe in being honest, true, chaste, benevolent, virtuous, and in doing good to all men. It doesn't get better than that. Yeah. We don't have a hell. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah. We don't really have a hell. You really have to be like a son of perdition. And I love that doctrine. I love the doctrine of eternity. I love the doctrine of eternal progression. And, I've actually joked that in the next life, this is from the Doctor Who episode. If you watch Doctor Who, there's a giant library that can be really sinister. But I was just like fascinated, a giant library that never ends. That's how I imagine my celestial kingdom, right? It's not going to be people dressed in white singing a hymn that I don't even like, So, and I think there is so much room because we believe in revelation, and also our origin story is full of magic and the love of God and God speaking to people again. Yeah. So I think all of that is pretty joyful. I think we just need to heed 2 Timothy 1:7, for God hath not given us a spirit of fear, because
Yeah.
sometimes in our culture there's a lot of that fear, and I experienced that. But the spirit of love, is it
Power.
Power.
love, and a sound
Yeah.
mind. What does a sound mind mean?
Yeah.
What does love mean? What is, and why are those things juxtaposed with fear?
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. And I really love all of those as reasons for why to stay. I think sometimes we cause so much suffering for ourselves because we have this idea that there's one bar that makes it worth staying, and that's truth claims.
Yeah.
The church is true, and then you stay. And so
Or you
if
don't,
that-
and then you leave.
or you
It's
don't,
just-
and then
Yeah,
it's
it's
like,
an
why-
all in or all out.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
love the idea that all of those reasons that you listed, including the community and it's my family's church and those things you said in the beginning, all of those are completely valid reasons to keep engaging and wrestling and growing and reaching in this way. And not that you have to, but that those are completely valid. But I'm thinking of like a regular fast Sunday, and we sort of reiterate to ourselves over and over that there's one good reason to stay, and we tell each other, I know this church is true, and then the next person, I know this church is true. And if you were a visitor, I think you would come away understanding that was the bar that you needed to be able to reach. So I was just curious what you would love about a fast Sunday. Like, what could you imagine people getting up and saying at the pulpit if it's not certainty?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so let me give you an example. In my ward, I think a year or during COVID, so probably over a year ago, this black gentleman walked in, went straight up to the podium and bore his testimony. And he said, I was just driving around and the Holy Ghost told me to stop
Whoa.
at this particular church and bear my testimony. And then he finished
my
bearing
gosh.
his testimony, and he walked out again, didn't even sit down.
Oh, wow.
Those are the testimony meetings that
That's
I love.
incredible.
That would keep
I
you
love
awake.
the most.
Yeah.
I love that we can get up there. And yes, there is some pressure to say, I know. But I've gotten up in testimony meetings and not said, I know. But I think I have shared what's in my heart that's important, or I've shared an insight about something. And that's okay. I think the I know is almost, it becomes just a ritual.
Yeah.
If a philosophy professor engaged someone who said, I know X, and begins to deconstruct the argument, it's very hard to defend something at the end of the day that I really know.
Yeah.
But even that whole tradition of speaking up, of just getting up and I can speak, or my child can speak. So if you're really looking for certainty, well, there is that, and I wouldn't discount that for those who are truly, truly certain. But I think for those who are less certain, first of all, you have to be clear with yourself. Don't make yourself miserable because you're not certain. Go in there and say, I'm not certain, but I want to listen to the music or listen to people who are so different from me. And what is it that I can learn? Because if you disengage, and there was a period in time that I probably went physically, but I wasn't there mentally, because I was just like in that phase of, being angry about so many things. And then I realized, wow, I am actually not the one who has to change. Like, I actually need to sit down, and maybe there's somebody here who needs me. And I've always said yes to all teaching positions, because I have loved teaching anything and then challenging people, to think. So in Manhattan, where I lived for 14 years, we had this ward where there were 2 Sunday school class, gospel doctrines. And if you were more orthodox, you go to that class. If you're less orthodox, you came to my class. And the
This is an unofficial sorting that just happened?
unofficial.
Okay.
It was like the hat, at Hogwarts,
Right.
Witch House. But what I loved about it was I would get very moving letters from people who were really struggling so hard with their faith, and hanging by a thread, and having them say, wow, this is so meaningful. It makes me want to read more, or just hang in there a little longer. I think that's great. And so I think if we can, the problem sometimes with religion and dogma is it does lead to a lot of disgust. That's from Jonathan Haidt's book. Disgust is a very powerful emotion. You're disgusted when someone doesn't believe exactly like you, or you're disgusted if somebody does X. You're disgusted if they use cuss words. It breeds a lot of disgust in us. And there was a point in time in my life where I was just so completely orthodox and so brittle that everybody disgusted me.
Yeah.
Because they weren't righteous. And instead of me thinking, okay, they're children of God, I should probably be curious about them and get to know them. Because how do you influence people? How did Christ influence people? He did it by working with the lowliest and the smelliest. Fishermen are smelly. And he worked with them, and come on, that disgust is the opposite of like the Sermon on the Mount, love one another. And religion can sometimes make you feel that way. Someone is just not orthodox enough, and it's disgusting. But is that what Christ wants us to feel? I don't think so.
Maybe in that sense, that scripture, the natural man is an enemy to God.
Yeah.
Maybe it's sort of that enmity between us, a feeling of disgust or dislike or whatever it is for another person that really makes us enemies to God. And it would be true connection and relationship.
Yeah.
It would get us more in alignment.
Yeah, it's curiosity. If I'm not curious about the other person, I can never understand them. And it's really hard to do because I want everybody to see the world the way I see it.
Yeah.
Do it the way I do it. And that's just not realistic. And I think for me, maybe it's also a function of age. You see so many things, and then you realize the things that should upset you or disgust you are just so not worth it. And another thing I love in the church is it tells us that, we need to really love one another. It starts in the family. And that's really hard to do. Who do we get angriest at? It's our siblings, our spouses.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, and this is a little bit of a change of subject, but I've been thinking about this as we've spoken. You wrote in your article that early on there was some sort of decoupling between your faith and sort of secular learning, and I'm curious how your faith is showing up sort of in your day, not on Sunday, in your day to day. You're the head of a secular university. You've achieved really the heights of success in the academic world and in many ways in the business world. So do you still put up strong boundaries between faith and secularism, or how do you incorporate the two?
Yeah, so not at all. So what happened to me was when I joined the church early on, I really took to heart the teaching to be in the world but not of the world. So I started to think in very dualistic terms.
Yeah.
Okay, this thing is of the world and in the world, and this thing is not of the world. And so I started thinking everything that was, about making money or your ambitions intellectually, those could be really bad. So because those are of the world and in the world. And yet, as I've gotten older, I realized that I shouldn't be a bifurcated person. I shouldn't be a bifurcated self. Like what I am at work, and whether you're doing technology or I was working on Wall Street, I mean, it's actually myself. My whole self is actually my spiritual self and my intellectual self and my emotional self. And, so I don't really differentiate. In fact, being in the world, maybe I would say, has become a lot more important to me as my career evolved. I was so in the world, and hit all of this kind of obstacles to faith because people would mock me. So in graduate school, I was just a weirdo because I believed in God, right? You can Harvard and MIT, most people don't believe in God. And or I remember once I was with a congressman from Florida, and we were one of these Aspen Institute conferences. We were in Berlin, and we're just walking, and he said, "I am so shocked. You're a Mormon. How could you be a Mormon? How could you be a smart, ambitious woman and be a Mormon? It's not possible." I was like, what? Like, there's so much prejudice out there.
Yeah.
And so I have felt like being in the world is a blessing. Being in the world, again, that idea of, in Buddhism, of interbeing. I am because you are. I am because my father was. I am because the tree is giving me oxygen.
Yeah.
So that's being in the world. And there's no figure who was more in the world than Christ was. But he was not in the world in the sense of respecting the Sadducees and Pharisees and the respectable people of the day. His was a very revolutionary kind of being in the world, in that he took every individual and said to them, "I see you. I see you as a harlot. I see you as a cripple. I see you as a fisherman. I see you as Jairus. You have some power. I see you as the Roman soldier. Like, he saw everyone. And that's what it means to be in the world, not to retreat into your cocoon, but actually to engage.
Yeah, I love that. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more specifically about how you have reconciled, though, maybe that very specific pain point of being a woman in the church, because that does feel like maybe there would be the most tension there. I imagine you now, in religious language, you preside in any room that you're in at UVU, So like there's got to be some whiplash when you walk into the church. And do you feel that power exchange happening, and how do you reconcile that?
So I think it is easier for me now. It was very hard for me in my, I have to say, in my late 20s, 30s. I just struggled so hard with it, and it probably was the cause of most of the anger.
Wow,
my angry face.
Yeah.
It was a 9-year phase that I can
Really?
only describe as anger and sadness and depression about the whole thing. But I kept
Yeah.
going to church, and I remember when I first went to the temple, and it was the old ceremony, and it came to the point where I thought, I want to walk out. But then I saw my mother, and I thought, I can't do this to my mother. I'm Asian. You don't do that to your mother. You sit there in your seat and you do everything as you're supposed to do. So I think so that pain point for me in many ways is not reconciled, but there is redemption in that, we are still a church that teaches Heavenly Mother.
Yeah.
We are a church that actually really, for a Christian church, it's very strange. We have the feminine divine, and so I feel very much that the seeds are there.
Yeah.
And you need some more revelation, and my reaction to that in my 20s, 30s, and 40s was to disengage in some ways. So when I had my first baby and I wanted to hold her while she was being blessed, and that's not allowed. And so I just had all these terrible kind of crisis points, and I'm like, well, I labored for 27 hours and I actually gave birth to her. I should hold her during the blessing. And so part of it is also for me realizing that my wholeness doesn't depend on that.
Mm.
It shouldn't, because it was causing mental health issues.
Yeah.
And that's not good. God does not want me to be miserable. Man is that he might have joy. So if that's giving me misery, I'm just going to say I don't engage with that.
Mm.
But I'm going to engage as a woman in the world with everything I know, and just be a child, blaze trails, be open, say yes, and influence people in many, many different ways. I've told this story in other contexts. One of my team members from Microsoft, and I worked in Asia, when he made like the biggest decision of his life or his career, wrote me this really beautiful note out of the blue, and he said to me, I just want to thank you for all those spiritual workshops you did with our team.
Yeah.
And I laughed because I thought, I don't think I did anything that was called a spiritual workshop. I didn't realize that, leadership, as I trained with them, and that was a spiritual journey for them. And so, and I'm a woman and I'm doing that. And there was another incident where, after my father died, I was living in Moscow. I think I was literally on the verge of a nervous breakdown because of fatigue and grief, and I didn't sleep for 10 days, and somebody gave me Ambien and it didn't work. And this woman who worked in Moscow, came from like a hippie commune in California. She said, is everything okay with you? And I said, no, it's been really tough. I haven't slept for 10 days. And she came over and brought me some soup, and then she did this Reiki
Really?
massage, non-touch,
Yeah.
It put me to sleep for like 27 hours.
Whoa.
And I call that the laying on of hands. I just think like,
Wow.
hey,
Yeah.
Barbara just did the laying on of hands and healed me. And so, I can't let the things that are not under my control destroy my joy.
Yeah.
Or destroy my belief or my faith or my willingness to engage with my faith. I have to constantly ask, what's under my control, what is the story that is really important to me. Because if you, and I think eventually that is actually ultimately the responsibility of every person of faith.
Yeah.
There was an excerpt from the Women's Exponent, like the original that Maxine Hanks included in her book Women in Authority, and they were talking about kind of these same issues, which blows my mind because this was 200 years ago.
Yes.
But they were talking about what they called the woman question and how we can't make it a man question.
Yeah.
And this is bringing that up for me again. I think sometimes we get stuck in this place of anger and sadness because we want a man to come and fix it. And we're trying to go through those channels. And I love that whole story because there's something really beautiful about letting the light flood other spaces, not waiting for someone to give you permission to do X, Y, and Z, but following your own intuition to recognize and find where our real power is. And maybe that doesn't look like priesthood, in this very masculine way that we have in the church. And I just think sometimes we get really small about imagining what equality could look like in the church. And that might be the thing that is stopping us. Maybe it really is about being out in the world and claiming that authority in all of the other ways that are that are real opportunities for us.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Would you have a follow-up question?
No, go ahead.
I want to ask you something that was a little bit unplanned, but I've been curious as we've been sitting here. You, I imagine, spend a lot of time with people in their late teens and early 20s, sort of Gen Z, and I'm just curious what you're seeing, what their concerns are, and in particular potentially as it relates to faith, and what we're missing as sort of like millennials and older generations, and what we might have to learn from those people, or what you've learned from them.
Yeah. So yes, I do spend a lot of time, and I think I'm responsible for the welfare of many people in that demographic. I've spoken many times at the institute on campus at UVU. That's the largest institute in the world, with anywhere from 6,000 to 7,000 students enrolled at any given time. I did a diversity evening with them as well, where students came in who were disabled, who were gay, and it's in the institute, which is really wonderful. And I love their choir. They have the most sublime choir at that institute. I think a lot of young people in the church are wrestling with is this still relevant to them?
Yeah.
I think they're wrestling with dogma versus what they feel they should do to be more loving and tolerant of others. So whether that's LGBTQ issues or just mental health, I think it's a difficult time to navigate because there's so much noise out there and so much unfiltered stuff. And I think to be able to process all of that in your faith, you must begin with a very strong foundation in the faith itself, right? If you've always just said yes, 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 and that's what we do when we're young, you follow your parents and you're not thinking critically, and then you wake up someday and you want to throw the baby out with the bath water. And I don't, of course, some people can make that choice, but I think it's a pity because when you throw the baby out of bath water, then you miss out as well on the really good things. So I think with with a younger generation, the sadness is there as well. I can feel that. Like there's a certain sadness. But for those for whom everything is working and, accept everything and everything is true, there's a lot of happiness that you can see.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to remember, who is lost and how can we make them feel safe. And by safety, I mean that our love is bigger than our fears. And so therefore, church can still be a welcoming place. Because the younger people also don't want to disappoint their parents, their grandparents, and so they just have that internal struggle. In a way, Utah Valley University, I'm really glad that it's there because in one place you have enough welcoming and belonging and safety that whether someone is just 100%, all in, let's say with dogma, ritual, and a more prescribed path. That's great. And then there are those who are maybe in the middle, and then there are those who are thinking of leaving, and those who have left. Yeah. And so here's one university where we could all engage one another. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes people make judgments that, and everyone is guilty of this. I cannot say that only, one party. We are all guilty of this, and that we truly let fear be stronger than curiosity and dialogue. There's plenty of room. The tent should be large enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I don't really have any answers. Of course, religion, they say in America, is also declining. But what does that mean? Are there many more people today simply engaging in kindness and self-care? And that could be a phase you're going through. But I think how we save religion is through more openness and more love. I asked my primary children, I think a month ago, what is the most important word, in all of life and all of scripture? It took them a while actually to say it's
Really?
love. It's like they were saying repentance. I think it is true that for almost any faith and for religions to survive, there has to be so much working across the aisle. And you don't have to dilute your beliefs. You can actually stay with your beliefs. But I think true religion requires us to be compassionate. One of my mentors said to me that a lot of the rituals can be done in half a day. But the work of building a Christ-like person, not even a lifetime is sufficient. And what's really wonderful is I think there's a lot of change. There's a lot of conversation going on. And I think I feel hopeful because of that. There's also so many people leaving, just in my own circles, in my family. I see that also, and it makes me feel a little bad because I feel like just stay with our people,
Yeah.
But I have to respect that too. And one of the things that I've learned is that faith is a long journey. As long as you're alive and you're willing to engage, it is a long journey. And there is a poem by T.S. Eliot that I cannot quote from memory, from Little Giddings. And I really love the phrase where he says there, you go back to the place where you came from and discover it for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Right. It's a very powerful phrase. And actually that whole poem is about faith. And so, can we do that? Can we discover it for the first time? I mean, I left Utah in 1986, and I have to say that coming back is like a rediscovery because it has changed so much. So you kind of know the place again for the first time, know the center of this religion, which is right here, know it again for the first time, and then celebrate the amount of good and the desire of people to do good and this amount of earnest effort. I mean, LDS people are just very, very earnest.
Yeah.
and I'm sure God celebrates that. I'm sure that's part of this journey of joy. And, in my essay for the book, I talk about a messy universe. It really is. Our categories don't work. Our taxonomies don't work. Our expectations don't work. And somehow we believe, like I said in my talk at church about a month ago, that God is not Santa Claus. Prayer, we should be treating prayer like, I did this, quid pro quo.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work like that. There are some scriptures that would make us believe that in the Doctrine and Covenants. But if you think like that, you will be disappointed. God's thoughts are not our thoughts, and His ways are not our ways. And so what does that mean? I think there is a certain way to live of acceptance. You do your very best, but a lot of acceptance of things as they are and people as they are. And I've just learned, in old age, the only person I could try to change is myself.
Yeah.
And my attitude, and I've evolved. And so I think what people should remember when they're facing, faith crisis or really, really sad or angry is that things are fluid. It's always fluid.
Yeah.
And you've never arrived.
Yeah. Would you, just as we sort of wrap up, I would love to hear you address the topic of belonging specifically, because it feels like that's something you have been able to navigate. It seems like you've really paved your own path in so many contexts, including the church. And I think that's a crisis for a lot of people. How have you found this sense of belonging without being the same as everyone? You know?
I think it begins with how we see our own individual selves. We have a lot of fragility, and I had a lot of fragility when I was younger because, you know, I wanted to please God. I wanted to please the bishop. I wanted to please my sisters. I just wanted to please everybody. And so in a sense, my own self wasn't whole. I was just so dependent on so many people. And I think over time, I just realized, hey, my thoughts are as valid as anyone else's. You know, my questions are valid. I shouldn't be dismissing myself. I shouldn't say that this is wrong. And I keep going to that scripture, the glory of God is intelligence. That just gave me so much hope. Because I'm like, does God want me to be dumb? Certainly not. I cannot make these leaps of logic that make no sense or deny history. And at the same time, I also had to tell myself, this whole thing is not a neat package. Why should I expect it to be a neat package? And in our LDS culture, there is that expectation that everything should be a neat package. You know, I go to church, I get married in the temple, I have a family, we go to the celestial kingdom. I mean, just life just doesn't work like that. And there is a Buddhist nun that I love, Pema Chodron, who says, you know, to be alive is to fall out of the nest over and over again. That's what it means to be alive. If you just expect a beautiful box with a ribbon, you're dead. Yeah. So I think taking ourselves seriously, loving ourselves is the first step, because we cannot love and engage others at church. We'll be disgusted with them. We will not like them. Yeah. I think that helps me a lot. And then, you know, I kind of take faith as an adventure. Like, I love these ideas. I love the craziness of the Old Testament. I love the mysteries. And I love that we are imperfect in this cauldron of imperfection. And we fall when we think everything is supposed to be neatly packaged. That's just a false presumption.
Amen.
This has been really, really beautiful, Astrid. Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to cover?
Well, I just want to say to people, don't give up on your faith. I mean, we are blessed, I think, to have a faith foundation such as we have. And it is such an adventure to keep engaging with it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for listening, and we really hope that you enjoyed that conversation with Astrid Tuminez. Huge thanks to Astrid for coming on the show. And again, if you want to check it out, you can read more from Astrid in Every Needful Thing, a collection of remarkable essays by Latter-day Saint women that was edited by Melissa Inouye and Kate Holbrook. And as always, if Faith Matters content is resonating with you and you get a chance, we'd love for you to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen on. It really helps get the word out about Faith Matters, and we really appreciate your support. Thanks again for listening, and as always, you can check out more at faithmatters.org.